Have you ever been in a coaching session and you're like, wait a minute, we've had this conversation already. The details changed a little bit. It's a different week, of course, but we've had something similar to this already. And you're wondering, how does your client keep ending up in the same place? That moment can make you question yourself as a coach. You may start wondering that you need to ask a better question. You might be thinking you need a new tool, a different worksheet, or something for this to stop happening. You want to help them and you keep creating things to help them, but it's not helping. That's what I want to talk to you about today, because your client already has plenty of advice. They don't need another tool to help them work through the thing. So let's get into it. How do you coach a client who feels stuck when more advice is not helping? That is the golden question. The first thing to understand is that knowing more does not always create change. Another tool, it does not is not always the thing that I want you to run to. A client can understand their problem very well. They may know where it started. They may know what they should do. They may have read the books that you recommended, listened to the podcast, and talked about the same thing over and over for months. They can explain the issue in a way that makes perfect sense, their issue in a way that makes perfect sense. And then they go back and do the same exact thing. This is what I call the insight plateau. The insight plateau is basically the point where insight that you give a client doesn't create more change. That person understands the issue, but understanding hasn't allowed them to reach the goal that they're trying to get to. This is where you as a coach can begin to overwork, because you're wondering, why are they not getting it? We can give the client another idea. We can recommend another book. We can send them another episode of whatever to listen to, and we can create another exercise, but the client comes back in the same place. That doesn't mean the client is lazy. It's easy to default to that. It doesn't automatically mean that your coaching isn't working either. It means that you need to shift and really begin to examine the client's patterns. They need to recognize their pattern earlier, know what it is, and recognize it early on in the game to find out what really is happening. Let me give you a quick example. Let's say that you're coaching a corporate professional who keeps saying that their boss doesn't respect their time. So one week the boss adds a project to their Asana or to their Slack at the last minute. Then next week, meeting appears on their calendar and there was no prior conversation about it. Or the boss sends them a message after hours, and the way the message is postured is that their boss wants an answer right away. Each situation is real. It's something they're really dealing with. After several versions of the same story, you start listening to what stays the same in all of that. The client usually knows right away that the request doesn't work for them. They know it makes them feel uncomfortable. They know they want to say no, but they agree to it anyway. And then after that, they get all in their feelings. They get upset because the boss should have known. They should have known not to do that. They should have known this request is too much. So you help them write a response. Typically, that's what you do. You'll help them write a response. You'll have a typical coaching conversation about boundaries. You'll give them what they can say next time. Then another version of the story comes back in a couple weeks. Then at that point, as their coach, they're trying to get you to coach them through the situation. And me, as your coach in this moment, I'm trying to get you to see there's a sequence, there's a pattern that keeps repeating, and it's going to keep repeating until you begin to help them address it. The client knows there's a problem, but they're not doing the right thing about it. They just agree to it, the frustration builds, all the things. And in essence, they're waiting for their boss to somehow understand what they actually never said. And so from inside your client's life, they might feel all of those things each time that happens. They might feel like it's separate events that they're trying to get you as their coach to help them with. They don't see what you can see as their coach, in that it's all connected. And that's where pattern blindness comes in. Pattern blindness is basically the difficulty of seeing a pattern in your own life, even though if they were saying it to a friend, they could see it in the friend's life. But in pattern blindness, they don't see it in their own life. It's hard to see it when you're standing inside of the thing. They'll be able to tell a friend, but they can't see it for themselves. Being that they can't see it for themselves, when it's time to recognize it, to choose a different response, they don't, because they don't see it. And that is the reason why your coaching matters. That's also why AI isn't going to take over your role. But that was my last video. Go watch it. Listen, a strong coach can hold several weeks of conversations and context at one time. You remember what the client said in those previous sessions. You hear the same thing coming up over and over and over, and they're packaging it as if it's a new situation, a new story. And over time, you notice that it's the same thing packaged differently. And as I'm coaching you right here, right now, I bet you're thinking about clients, several different clients that you can see this rings true with. And that's why I want to invite you into the world of pattern fluency as a coach. Pattern fluency is the skill of hearing a client's old patterns inside of a new story. It doesn't mean you rush to label your client, oh, you're doing this, oh, you're doing that. You don't necessarily even need to announce it to know exactly what their pattern is. You just slow down the story when you begin to see their pattern and you help them look at it objectively. You might say something like, now, before we figure out what to say to your boss this time, can I share something with you that I'm noticing across our last couple of weeks? And when you say that, you're essentially and energetically inviting them to lean into what you're about to say. And at that point, you reflect on what you heard in plain language. Like you might say something like, you seem to know pretty on that the request that your boss gave you doesn't work for you, but you usually agree before you say what you actually need to say. What happens in that first moment? Because that's where you begin to recognize a pattern. What happens? Ask your client, what happens in that first moment? And that question will take their brain and their being somewhere else. And at that point, you're no longer solving for what they think they came to you for. You're helping them really look at the moment that keeps leading to an ending that they don't want. There's 4 things I want you to do when you notice this inside of a coaching session. Number 1, first, pause before you give your client an answer. When a story sounds familiar and you're like, we've talked about this before, I want you to pause and take a second and ask yourself, what part of this have I heard before as their coach? You might notice a repeated phrase. Maybe the client always says, I didn't have a choice. Maybe they keep waiting for somebody else to act first. Maybe the details change, but they always reach for the same point. And that's your indicator that this is a pattern. You don't need to solve it in your head immediately. Just notice it. Notice what keeps happening over and over. Number 2, next, I want you to listen for the order of events. Patterns often hide inside of a sequence. So I want you to ask yourself, as their coach, what happened first? When did the client know something was off? What did they do next after that? What were they hoping the other person would say? Or what were they hoping that the other person would understand? And at what point did the frustration that they had become much bigger than it initially was? That sequence will often tell you more than the final dramatic moment of why they really, really, really got mad. But by the time they get mad or have their blow up, if you will, if it's that type of person, there's a sequence of events that happen way before that. And as their coach, that's what you need to be able to recognize as you lean in to become fluent in reading their patterns. So, third, I want you to reflect the sequence without making it a verdict. You could say something like, I may be missing something here, Sally, but I've noticed the same thing happen a few times, essentially in the same order. You already know the request that your boss made doesn't work for you, but you agreed to it anyway, and then resentment shows its ugly head later. Does that fit for you or no? And now the client gets to look at it with you and they can agree objectively now outside of the moment. And you guys are looking at the issue together. They allow them space to correct you. They can add something that you didn't know, so some sort of context or whatever. But what it does when you handle it this way is it keeps your coaching session collaborative with the client. You're not telling the client you're this and you're that. You're not finger pointing. You're showing them an angle that they may not see. And that's what we do as coaches. We offer a different perspective. You're showing them what they may not have noticed. So finally, help them find the earliest place where they can do something different. A lot of coaches try to fix the biggest part of the story, the blow up, the argument, at what point did they shut down, the deadline, the decision to leave the workplace. But the best impactful coaching is what happens about 10 minutes, 10 hours, 10 days, in some cases 10 months before that. So in our example, the earliest choice point may be the moment that your client notices that the request doesn't work for them and they didn't say anything, but that is the pinnacle moment. And so the new action could be simply saying something like telling her boss, let me check with my schedule before I can agree to that. That one sentence creates a different aura, a different vibe, a different space, a different posturing, reposturing of the relationship with her boss. It gives the client time to think. It interrupts an automatic yes that they're used to giving and they resent it later. You could even practice it role play with them during you guys' session. You can talk about what feelings come up when they say that sentence that they've never said before. And without your help, they would have never said. Role play with them and then make a plan for what they'll do if the boss pushes back. Role play that too. Now you've put the client in the driver's seat. The client is leaving with one moment to begin to recognize what different response to have and how to practice it. That is how Insight begins to move and navigate in real life or real impactful coaching sessions. And that's essentially what you're looking for when you find a client that is on the Insight Plateau. They probably don't need you to explain the issue one more time or give them another tool. They need support in catching the pattern, knowing it exists, becoming aware of it, and catching it at the pinnacle that it arises. This also changes how you measure their progress. Sometimes it might be having that conversation without feeling so nervous. The boss is still going to make unreasonable requests, but you're not coaching the boss. So you're not looking for a humongous win all the time. The win might be that the client notices the pattern in the moment instead of 3 days later and builds a resentment. Then maybe pause before they're saying yes. Those are all micro wins, but they're wins nonetheless. And then later they say what they need to say clearly. That is where the real work is. Sometimes as coaches, we miss that because we're looking for a huge breakthrough. Sometimes it's not a huge breakthrough. Patterns usually change through small little micro moments that happen earlier and earlier and earlier. And it's your job as their coach to help them detect that. When the client can first see that, that's when they're putting themselves in the driver's seat and they notice it. After a while, they'll notice it while it's happening. Eventually, they'll be able to recognize it before it starts and they can choose differently. And that's where their real growth is. So, next time a client comes back with a story that sounds very familiar, you've heard it before, don't panic and assume that you need to give them a brand new lesson, a brand new tool, all the things. Just get curious about their pattern. Where is the client inside of the Insight Plateau? What can't they see because of pattern blindness? What sequence keeps leading to the same results? And where is the first small point where another choice becomes possible for them? That's where pattern fluency changes the quality of how you coach. You stop chasing every new detail and trying to give them a thing for it. You begin to help the client recognize the pattern while they're still in it real time. And that is much, much more valuable than giving them one more piece of advice that they essentially already know. So listen, if you're a coach and you want to become stronger in this type of pattern fluency in this work, and you want to build a business that brings paid clients into it, I'd love to invite you to the Impactful and Paid Coach Workshop. Inside the workshop, I'll help you look at the business pieces that support your coaching, from how you position your work to how you attract and enroll the right clients. The link is down below in the description, and subscribe to my channel because we're going to keep talking about pattern fluency, coaching skills, human behavior, and what it takes to build a coaching business that creates real results and allows you to live the life you want. I'll see you in the next video.